IsInScope is a very commonly used information function. Its goal is to detect whether a column has only one value or not, much like has one value does, but it also performs an additional check. That is, the column needs to be currently grouped by a grouping by function, like summarize or summarize column. It is very commonly used because Power BI uses summarize column as its primary querying function. Therefore, the columns that you put on the rows or on the columns of a matrix or of a table, they are always in scope inside the cells, and they might no longer be in scope at the subtotals. Let's see its usage in more detail. In this first example, I'm using summarize columns, and I'm grouping by brand and country region. And then I just create 3 columns: brand in scope, country in scope, and product name in scope. They check respectively if the product brand is in scope, if the country region is in scope, and in a similar way for the product name. Both brand and country region are currently being grouped by summarize columns. Indeed, brand in scope and country in scope is always true, whereas product name is not in scope because it is not being grouped by, and besides, in this case, it also has multiple values. The scenario becomes a bit different at the subtotal level, because at the subtotals, as you will see in the next demo, IsInScope is even more powerful. A practical example of usage of IsInScope is to compute the percentage over parent. The percentage over parent in a hierarchy of levels computes the percentage of the current value against the value of the parent. That is why it needs to detect in which level of the hierarchy the cell is being computed. Let's see the code. Percentage over parent, first of all, computes the sales amount for all selected, and we store this value in all sales. This is the grand total of sales in the current selection. Category sales computes the sales amount for the given category, so only for the current category. And current sales computes the sales amount in the current cell. My entire measure will be executed inside a summarize column that does a grouping by category and subcategory. Then I have a switch that checks in which level of the hierarchy I am computing the cell. If the product subcategory is in scope, that means I am showing a row at the subcategory level, and I want to compute the current sales divided by the sales at the category level in order to compute the percentage over parent. If, on the other hand, the category is in scope, then I want to compute the current sales divided by all sales. So at the category level, I will show the percentage of the category against the grand total. And you can see the result here. For the category audio, I'm showing the subcategories. For each subcategory, the sales amount, and the percentage over parent shows 3 values that sum together lead to 100%, because here we consider 100% the sales amount of all audio. For the subtotal of the category audio, on the other hand, the subcategory will not be in scope, so we will go for this branch, and we show the percentage of audio against the grand total. So IsInScope is very commonly used whenever you want to perform different calculations depending on which level of the hierarchy you are on. There is a word of warning about IsInScope, because it works exactly as it is expected to work, but much like AllSelected does, IsInScope needs to determine the level of the hierarchy that you are currently browsing by deriving this information from other places, because DAX does not contain even the concept of a hierarchy. So how does it work? AllSelected has a much more complex algorithm. It analyzes the current filter context and checks that first, the column has only one value in the current filter context. Then, the one value, so the filter which is filtering only one value, is either coming from a context transition, so an iterator like add columns, or a filter which has been created by a grouping function like add columns. And this filter need to be still active. So the filter created by either summarize column or context transition should have not been replaced by another filter. We can see the result here. I'm using add columns to iterate over the color. Add columns is an iterator, therefore it generates a row context that calculate transforms into a filter context. So a filter context that was generated by context transition. If I check is in scope product color, in the first calculation, I use also another filter that does filter values of product color true. This filter actively replaces the filter generated by context transition. So the filter generated by context transition will no longer be active. And as a consequence, this is in scope will be false. You see the result here. If on the other hand I use keep filters on the same expression, keep filters keeps the previous filter active, it adds a further filter, but the filter that was generated by context transition is still active in the filter context and therefore is in scope returns true.